I am confused about how to adjust to changes around me and inside myself. Please give further explanations. Change is the nature of the universe. All of that which is alive changes. Whether it's a river that's flowing, whether it's a tree, whether it's a flower bush, whether it's us, whether it's a cloud floating overhead, whatever it is, the nature of nature is to change. Walk into the jungles behind the ashram today, take a picture of it, come back a couple months later, it's going to look completely different. I remember the first summer that I was away, we were on about a 2.5 month Dharma Yatra. I won't go into the details of that, but in the United States and other countries, it was a pilgrimage for peace that Puja Swamiji used to lead a lot of them in different countries. And we were out for July and August and a bit of either June or September, I don't remember. But when we came back after the monsoon, I had never seen what a monsoon does to nature. And when we came back after the monsoon and drove through the back, the jungle road and up here, I felt like I had entered in my own little shop of horrors. I don't know how many of you have ever seen that, but it's a show, a famous show of basically a flower shop, I think it is, right, that comes alive. And, little small plants, how they literally become this shop of horrors. And my first experience coming back was, oh my God, these hills have become like a little shop of horrors. It was a shop of heaven rather than horror, but nonetheless, everything had changed. This is the nature of nature. 2 months later, they went back to pretty much what they had looked like before. So, change is inevitable. The issue with change is not so much how do we adjust to it, because then you literally would spend 100% of your time and energy adjusting to change. You're constantly changing. Your body is constantly changing. The world around you is constantly changing. The bodies of the people you love are constantly changing. We're all getting older. When you're young, very young, that age, you get older, it looks a different way. When you're this age and you get older, it looks a different way. But we're all aging. That change is constant. Our thought processes are changing. Our emotional state is changing. Even during the course of one day, from how you feel when you wake up in the morning, through the peaks and the valleys of the day, some highs, some lows, some challenges, some beautiful moments. Even just how your mind works is constantly changing. And so if our goal is, how do I adjust to the change? That would be pretty much all I had time to do. Would be stay on track with changes that are taking place and adjust to them. But since we clearly are put on earth for something other than adjusting to our own change, we have to look for a different solution. Obviously, the goal is not don't adjust, because then you're just miserable. Then you find that you hold very, very tightly, very tenaciously to how things used to be, how things always were. Whether it was in your body, in your life, in your relationships, or whether it's culturally. This comes up a lot, particularly in the Indian culture. I can't tell you how many parents in their, anywhere ranging from 50s to 60s come to me asking what to do with their kids who are now in their, maybe 20s, 30, early 30s, because their children are not wanting to live lives the way that they did. They're not wanting to marry on time. They're not wanting to live in the family house. They're not wanting to, follow what the family has always done. They're not having children. They're, all of these aspects. The parents come and say to us, could you talk some sense into them? I don't know what is wrong. By the time, he or she decides they're ready for marriage, it'll be too late. And of course, parents worry as though somehow there were a critical window. But the culture is like that. In just a generation, really 2 generations, but even in just 1 generation, this culture is changing drastically. And it's especially drastic when you look at it abroad. You have people who were born and raised in India, move abroad for higher studies or to get a job after completing their education. Now their children are born and raised abroad. In 1 generation, you have this change. And so either we hold tenaciously to it, well, that's the way I've always done it. That's the way my parents did it. That's the way my grandparents did it. That's the way everyone I've ever known has done it. Therefore, it's right. And therefore, you are wrong. And so I'm going to lock you in your room for the next 20 years, or I'm going to, force you to live the life that I think you should live. With well intentions, of course, good intentions, of course. But really what that's about is just holding on with a death grip, really, to how things have always been. It's no change. And so clearly that's not the answer. Khalil Gibran has a beautiful poem in which he says something like, I always have to mention I'm paraphrasing because his words are so beautiful and my paraphrasing doesn't really do justice to them. But he has a line in one of his poems that says something like, the winds of time move only forward. That time never goes back. You can never rewind and say, I know, we're gonna go back to what life was like before we had smartphones. We're gonna go back to what life was like before there was social media. Some of us would like to, but you can't. You can't go back to what life was like before the TV came into India, before broadcasting was open to shows that came in from all over the world, before the internet entered our pockets, forget our lives. We can't go backwards. Not in your body, not in your relationships, and not in our culture. So neither do we want to spend all of our time adjusting to change, nor do we want to hold stubbornly against change. And the only other option I think that works is simply moving through your life with the awareness that change is constant and change is inevitable. And so you don't have to adjust to it every time. I know, for example, it's hot these days. I'm not such a hot weather person. I'm much more of a cold weather person. But if I spent every minute of every day trying to adjust to the heat, I would get nothing else accomplished. Similarly, if I tried to, grab January with a death grip and say, no, you can, all right, fine, you can turn into February, but no, you cannot become May. I mean, obviously, the seasons aren't going to listen to me. And so the only option becomes simply an awareness that, Summer comes, and yeah, it's hot. And yeah, you sweat. You sweat out of places that you had no idea you even had places. You sweat from pores that you had no idea even existed. And you laugh, and you sweat. But it's part of the summer. And I think that if we bring this, I try to bring this into every aspect of change in my life. It's just, change is there. How can I coexist with it? How can my identity just keep expanding in such a way that, okay, now who I am is someone who has to, make sure not to do things with her body too quickly, because the body is now almost 50 instead of 20. How can my identity of self simply expand to that rather than require constant adjustment? How can we simply hold on to that which doesn't change, which is the soul, the spirit, the self? So we're realigning ourselves. I'm anchoring in that which doesn't change. My soul, my spirit, consciousness, the truth of who I am, unchangeable. Anchor there. And just move through the world with an awareness that everything else is going to keep changing. Ideally, it's going to keep changing for the better. The body doesn't always do that, but ideally, internally, the rest of us does. Internally, my mind, my heart, my thoughts, my emotions. Ideally, day by day, the change that I witness is one for the better. I lose myself to anger less frequently each week, each month. Lose track of my thoughts less frequently each week, each month. I'm able to embody a little bit more love, a little bit more presence each week, each month. So ideally that change is going to be a good one. If you find that it's changing in the wrong direction, that you're getting, as Puja Swamiji says, bitter rather than better, it's when we stop and ask, all right, what direction am I going in? So change is inevitable, but we do have a little bit of say over the direction it goes in terms of the internal change, in terms of the choices and the decisions that we make. But that has to be, the presence of change has to be just taken as an absolute companion on your journey through life. Imagine that you had a Siamese twin. Not going to be cut off. You're not going to be separated. Siamese twin there all the time. That twin is change. Wherever you go, there's going to be change. And the more you try to push that other being off, the more frustrating life becomes. And so we just simply open our awareness to the fact that, yeah, everything changes, except the truth of who I am. So that part within me that craves stability, I anchor into the true self. I anchor into the soul, which is timeless and changeless. And then the rest of it, we just try to keep enough space in our awareness for, okay, now this, okay, now that. And try to see whether you can have a little bit of awe and wonder in it. Okay, now this, wow, interesting. All right, wow, now that, okay. What is this teaching me? What am I learning? How am I growing? Or is it just, the trees have grown? But when it's inside, can I have that sense of awe and wonder about the changes inside myself? Wow, all right, another layer. Okay, a little more tension, a little bit more resistance. Interesting. Let's create space for that. You know, one of my favorite meditations is an open eye meditation on Ganga, where, and anyone who has any sort of issues with change, I really recommend this. I used to do this a lot. You sit on Ganga with your eyes open and find a rock. Could be a big rock in the middle of the river. It could be a little rock right on the edge of the river. It doesn't matter where it is. But find a rock over which the water is flowing. But you can still see, but the water is flowing over it. And anchor your visual awareness, your meditative awareness, onto that rock where Ganga is flowing. And just allow the eyes to kind of blur as they do in meditation, but stay right there. And the reason it's so powerful is what you are seeing is constant, it doesn't change. Rock with Ganga. You can keep meditating, keep watching, it doesn't change. It's constant. And yet, because of the nature of the flow of the river, it's in a constant state of change. Even for a split second, it's not the same. Because the water that's running over the rocks is new water every split second. So the essence of the image is the same, water over rock. But the actual reality of the image is constantly changing. And what I learned from doing that was an ability, a habit, to anchor myself in essence rather than form, as much as possible. So the essence of what you're seeing is water on rock, Ganga over rock. Form, constantly changing. Which molecules of water, constantly changing. But if I'm anchored in essence, Ganga, then it's still and constant. So it's a very, very powerful technique to teach you deep inside how to anchor in that which is constant, even in the midst of that continual change.